Hello, friends. Do not adjust your YouTube channel, stream. I want to say TV channel every time I do the introduction, even though I know we're not on an actual TV. But you are watching Best Ball Live. I am hosting tonight again, but in a surprise twist, Greg is also here in the co-hosting duty role because we are doing something different tonight. Best Ball Live goes deep, as you can see on the screen. Greg is in the Going Deep A League, which is an industry 12-team Superflex league created by Mike Clay over at ESPN. And so, Greg, are you ready to avenge last year's championship loss?
Yes, absolutely. I need to take it back from Ben Gretch and Shawn Siegele. They drafted an incredible team last year. Like I honestly have no shame in losing to what they put together last year because it was bonkers. I don't know if you have the results from last year, but we should look at that draft board and just you have to understand what type of league this is, right? We start 3 running backs every week, 6 wide receivers every week, 2 tight ends every week, and essentially 2 quarterbacks every week because it's super flex. And these guys started off their draft with basically the 2 best tight ends and 2 of the best quarterbacks. It was pretty tough to beat. Can't deny it. They did a great job.
So yeah, here's last year's results. As you can see, they went Kelsey, Lamar, Watson, then Waller. So they went with that double tight end, double quarterback stack. One thing you didn't mention is that this is a tight end premium league too, as I was looking through the results. So it's full PPR, but tight ends get that extra half PPR boost to it.
And then look who was sitting there for them in round 5 too. It's just gross. It's Stephon Diggs, like in the 5th round.
So basically, they had the best tight end, one of the best quarterbacks, probably, and the second best tight end, and the best receiver. It just is loaded. I can understand how this team won. I was looking at the score. I couldn't find the actual head-to-head matchup of the championship team, but you got smoked to put it.
It was not close. Yeah,
like you lost by like 50 or 60 points.
Now, to be clear, look what happened to my team. Look who I picked in the first round at 2nd overall, and I still made the finals. So I'm pretty proud of how I did. And like I said, no shame in losing to those guys because 1, both of them are super sharp, and 2, they drafted an insane team. So we got to try to outdo them this year. We got to take it back.
To be fair, though, it was 2 against 1. Like that's you were going up against not only Shawn Siegele, but also Ben Gretch, like 2 of probably the sharpest people in the fantasy industry.
You know, and I got to shout out you before we get too deep into this because I wouldn't be in this league if you didn't invite me to be a co-manager like 5 years ago or something like that. So at first we did this league together. I think we even forgot about the draft one year or something like that. We ended up auto drafting and still doing okay for like a few rounds. But yeah, I kind of took over a couple of years ago and we've been running with it. And yeah, it's a really competitive league. I love the format that Mike Clay put together here. It's super, super deep. And I mean, it's right there in the title, right? Going deep. Like I love to start 2 tight ends, start 3 running backs, start 6 wide receivers. Like I love Superflex. Like I've been doing these Superflex best balls on the stream all off season. Like you and I did the 2 QBs draft guide together. So like we're all about 2 QB. I love how deep we have to go with the other positions here because it really does force you into tough decisions every round of the draft, trying to navigate where the value is falling to you, what position. So really curious to see how it plays out this year because last year was so unique, right? We saw so many big scores from like the top end guys that I wonder if it's going to be a little bit more balanced this year and how that's going to affect everything, but we'll see.
See, the thing is, like, you don't have to thank me for inviting you into this league because not only were you the runner-up last year, you actually won the league 2 years ago. So technically that means I also won this league without having to do a single goddamn thing. So that is all the thanks I need. But if we look at this year's draft board, as you can see, the people in it, we got Jared Smola of Draft Sharks. We have Pete. I'm gonna screw up everybody's name, but I think it's Pete Schoenke.
I would say Schenke.
Schenke.
I mean, I'm sorry, Pete.
I'm sorry, Pete.
I'm screwing it up too.
I'm going to be saying sorry a lot. Over at RotorWire, we got yourself picking 3rd. We got Jeff Ratcliffe over at Fade the Noise, FTN. We got, again, the champs from last year, Shawn Siegele and Ben Gretch. Shawn over at RotoViz, Ben from his Stealing Signals newsletter. Here's another name I'm probably going to mess up, Matt Schauf over also from Draft Sharks. We got JJ Zachariason over at FanDuel Numberfire, Jason Sablich over at Fifth Down Fantasy. We got Bob Harris from Football Diehards. We got Mike Clay from ESPN, Scott Pianowski from Yahoo, and the fantasy godfather Matthew Berry, also from over at ESPN Fantasy. So This is a very stacked draft room. We will have Jared and Matt from Draft Sharks showing up later on in the stream to get their thoughts. But this draft kicks off in 5 minutes. You're picking third overall. If I had to guess, CMC 1, maybe QB second. I'm not sure who Henry is thinking there with Pete, but say it goes Kelsey Mahomes. I mean, not Kelsey Mahomes, McCaffrey and Mahomes. Who are you targeting with that third pick?
Yeah, this is a really weird spot to be in because I have no idea what the person at 2 is going to do. Like I actually struggled with this decision in one of my home leagues over the weekend that we drafted. I drew the second pick, and I actually just overpaid to the guy in first just to swap number 2 for number 1. Anyway, because I just didn't want to have to make that decision at 2. And so here somebody else has to make that decision. We have a little bit more information when we pick third. And I mean, if it goes McCaffrey, Mahomes, like it'll be tough to pass up Dalvin Cook. But I think you can make the argument for Travis Kelce, mostly based upon like even last year when Waller was awesome, Kelce was still something like 60 or 70 points better than Waller in this format. And they let Sammy Watkins go from Kansas City. I really think that Chiefs offense is going to be consolidated across Kelce and Tyreek Hill primarily. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to get some touches. You know, the tertiary receivers are going to get some work too. Demarcus Robinson, Byron Pringle, that whole group. But to me, like I look at that offense and I just don't see a reason, you know, barring injury, that Kelce can't reproduce what he did last year from a volume perspective. Do we trust him to do it when he's another year older? That's a big question mark. And there's also the question of how deep is tight end, or how many tight ends do you have to start relative to the other positions, right? Like part of me wants to just take the best wide receiver because I have to start 6 of those, but wide receiver is a lot deeper than tight end. So I don't know, like if I'm in that position, I'm probably just taking Dalvin Cook, but I would be very tempted by Kelce and pretty tempted by the top receivers. I don't think there's an argument for another running back. Like, I mean, you can make the case for Alvin Kamara, Ezekiel Elliott, maybe someone else. But with the full PPR, like I think Dalvin Cook in a really run-heavy offense in Minnesota is probably my pick in that scenario. But there's no guarantee Cook makes it to me at 3, right? We could see CMC and Cook go 1-2, and then I have another tough choice on my hands.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say if you don't go Kelce, Waller will probably be gone by the time you're on the clock in round 2, with a very outside slim chance of maybe Kittle being gone too. I have seen him fall into the third round, but again, we have to remember this is not only tight end premium scoring, but like I said, you can start, you have to start 2 tight ends. You could technically start 3 tight ends, 1 in the Superflex as well. And I think that's probably the best thing about this league is you can really do anything you want and justify that pick because you have to start 2 quarterbacks. You have to start 3 running backs, 6 receivers, 2 tight ends, tight end premium, 6 points per passing touchdown, or is it 4?
It's only 4, and the passing yardage actually skews to be not as good as your standard league. So generally the rushing quarterbacks get pushed up here because the passing yardage isn't worth as much. So that's another consideration. We'll see how that goes. Typically it doesn't make a huge difference on the draft, but that's one of the reasons why Ben and Shawn's Lamar Jackson pick last year was so sharp. They got him at a little bit of a discount relative to his talent as a rushing quarterback in a Superflex league, and it really paid off for them.
And if I go back quickly to last year's draft, as we can see, kind of a QB light start to this league. Only 1 in the first round, 3 in total within the first 2 rounds.
And I think that's 7. Indicative of the depth of the positions, right? Like as good as the top end QBs are, the mid-tier and the lower tier quarterbacks are all still usable and startable. Whereas when you get down into the dregs of the running back and wide receiver positions, like you don't want your 4th wide receiver in this league to be bad. It's okay if maybe your 5th or 6th wide receiver is not very good, but you can skimp on quarterback to make sure you're doing well at other positions. And I think that's why you see the draft board play out the way it does. But that doesn't mean the QBs aren't valuable. Like again, Ben and Shawn illustrated that with their draft last year by taking 2 in the first 4 rounds.
Definitely a lot of blue, a lot of running backs. I can see that trend continuing on this year. So we know this is a Superflex draft. It does start right now. First pick is already in the docket there. As we can see, Christian McCaffrey, 1st overall.
No surprise there.
To Jarrett. And then next up, we see, and then Dalvin Cook, you're on the clock.
I'm on the clock. I think I'm going to take Kelce. I feel a little strange about it because I've had a lot of success in this league not paying up for tight ends, but I mean, again, Kelsey really outscored everybody at the position and was just one of the top 3 scorers overall. So we're going to do it. We're going to embrace the tight end premium format. We're going to take Travis Kelce 3rd overall.
I honestly absolutely love that pick. Since we have a little reprieve until your next pick, I would be remiss not to mention to anybody watching, listening, that this is a Superflex draft over at 2QBs. We did release a Superflex draft guide this year. If you go to superflex.guide, use the promo code 4for4, you can get 15% off your order, which, I mean, it's only $11 to begin with. You get this 15% off. You're spending less than $10 to get a Superflex draft guide, strategy article from Ben Gretch, who won this league last year, 4 sets of rankings, cheat sheets from Greg. Everything you need to prepare for your Superflex draft is in there. So remember, superflex.guide, 4for4 promo code, 15% off your order. So now that we got that out of the way, how are you feeling about this draft board after your pick? Like, if you're in your mind trying to like game theory this out as to what could happen, what are you thinking is going to happen between now and your next pick?
Yeah, this is an interesting situation because you have to go so deep at every position. You're constantly auditing the depth of every position and making sure you don't fall too far behind at any given spot. And I think the places where that pops up the most are running back and quarterback. I don't want to have 2 terrible quarterbacks. I'm okay with like 1 pretty good quarterback and 2 streamers. Like that works for me. But I want to make sure I get at least 1 quarterback that I'm happy with. You know, we have plenty of rounds to do that, hopefully. It's the running back position that scares me the most because those bell cows are just scarcer and scarcer every season, it seems. Although, with that said, some of the injuries that have happened late in the preseason may have pushed up a couple guys, you know, James Robinson, Darrell Henderson, Gus Edwards. So there are a lot of different ways that maybe we can try to mine value at the running back position. With that said, if you get one of these studs like McCaffrey or Cook or Kamara or Ezekiel Elliott, like that does set you up pretty well to just have that 1 running back spot on your roster locked up, no worries. Like I'm just starting this guy every week, and that's something I gave up with this Kelce pick. So I'm a little worried that I'm going to be scrambling at running back all season. And that's usually not where I want to be. Like from a week to week management standpoint, this is one of the reasons why I tend to lean into late round tight ends is because, you know, if I have Kelce, that's great. But if I don't have Kelce, like only one other drafter has Kelce, right? So if I'm playing against everyone in the league, and this is an all play format, we should mention that as well. Like my tight ends just need to be better than like half the league, say. And I feel like I can do that with the mid-round guys. So yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of rambling here. I don't know if this makes any sense, but essentially, like, I'm worried about the safety I gave at running back to make that Kelce pick.
Right.
And I got to make sure I don't overreact to that. Because as we saw from Ben and Shawn's draft last year, they didn't take a running back in the first 5 rounds, and they were fine. They won the league going away. Like, their team was insane. So
round 6, actually.
Yeah, proper 0 RB does work at times. It's not my comfort zone, though, and that's why I'm like a little wishy-washy on the whole situation.
So Devontae Adams just went 6 overall. He was also the first receiver last year at 8th overall, just 1 receiver last year in the first round. Since we were talking a little bit about running backs there, what is your cutoff for the first tier running backs? So let's say you're thinking about maybe targeting one of those backs in round 2, but the last guy from your tier ends up being taken right before you pick. Where does your tier end?
So I have McCaffrey in a tier all by himself, and then I have Elliott, Cook, Derrick Henry, Barkley, and Alvin Kamara in my next tier. And I'm higher on Barkley than others. Like I feel like the injury stuff with him is a little overblown. So I do include him still in that elite tier or that elite second tier, because who's challenging him for touches there? Like their receivers aren't all that great. Their quarterback's all that great. Like they're going to give Barkley a lot of touches, and all I really want is the volume. So he qualifies there. And then just barely behind that tier of 5 guys, I have Austin Eckler and Aaron Jones really close. Like you could convince me to bump one or the other, maybe both up into that tier, but there's something about them like that I'm just a little bit more wary of that kind of keeps them outside of it. So after McCaffrey, like my top tier is Cook, Elliott, Henry, Barkley, Kamara. And then just behind them, I have Jones and Eckler. I think the argument is, you know, whether you include Barkley in that top tier and then whether you include Jones or Eckler. But I think Cook, Elliott, Henry, and Kamara are kind of unassailable. Like they have to be up there.
So let's say all those running backs you just mentioned are off the board by the time you pick in round 2. Who leads the next tier of your running backs, and when would you target them and say like in a non-going deep league?
So I'm looking at rankings right now that have Nick Chubb there. I wouldn't take Chubb, like these are half point PPR rankings I'm looking at. That's kind of the way my brain wraps around fantasy rankings. In full PPR, like maybe Jonathan Taylor jumps ahead of Nick Chubb. Maybe not. Honestly, because I do perceive such a big drop off there between Aaron Jones, Austin Eckler, and the next tier, I'm probably not necessarily jumping at Chubb, Jonathan Taylor, and that whole group. Like the next tier for me, I'd rather at that point pivot to wide receiver, I would say.
So we're seeing our first quarterback go off the board here, Patrick Mahomes, no surprise, 10th overall to Mike Clay. We're going to be ending this first round, starting the second round soon. Walk me through your thought process right now as Josh Allen and Diggs just went to Matthew Berry on the 1-2 turn.
Yeah.
Which I'm not going to lie, that's a sexy start.
It's a nice little stack to start it off. That's fun. I'm feeling pretty okay about the start so far. I'm not a huge fan of quarterbacks early. So seeing people take Mahomes and Josh Allen in the first round is okay with me. Mm-hmm. That in theory pushes the positions I want down to me with my next pick. And yeah, we've seen 3 receivers go already. So I'm not too worried about the running backs going. There goes Kittle. That's a nice little value in the second round relative to where the other 2 tight ends went. But yeah, we'll see who falls back to me here. And I think it really is about reading the room in this case, because everyone here is sharp. Everyone here understands the format. And I think you really do have to mine the draft tiers that you're looking at for value. And so I'm really not going to know that until maybe 1 or 2 picks before I'm up. And that'll, happen sooner rather than later. But there's, I've got my eye on a couple wide receivers. I've got my eye on the running backs we discussed earlier, just because, if I can get one of them in the second round, I think that works. I think I drafted Aaron Jones at the 2-11 last year, and that worked out. So like there is value to be had at running back still, but we'll see, what happens here. We got a couple more picks before we're up.
So it's interesting to see that Jason over there from the 108 slot, the only team so far to go receiver, starting off with Tyreek Hill and Calvin Ridley. I know there's been a lot of talk of Ridley potentially being like the number 1 wide receiver. Are you surprised that he went 5th from the receiver group in this draft?
No, I mean, I have him ranked 4th.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm in on Ridley. I think Hopkins there is a steal. Like that's a player who I'm very interested in relative to like how he is compared to the other wide receivers. Like I consider him in the same class as Calvin Ridley and Stephon Diggs tier wise. Mm-hmm. And the fact that, you get him last of that tier, typically the fact that in this draft, he went behind DK Metcalf, like, I don't know, that seems like pretty good value to me.
All right, so you're 1, 2, 3 picks away. We got Shawn and Ben and Jeff before you. What do you think are the odds here of Shawn and Ben taking another tight end? Like, is it too early for that Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts
I don't think they'll do it. I think you can wait on those guys at this point. Like the value right now is at running back, quarterback, and wide receiver. Like jumping all the way down to Andrews is fancy play.
Are you surprised that this has been kind of an RB light draft so far through these first 2 rounds?
No, not after the way that last season played out, where 0 RB actually was good. Again, like this is a sharp group. It's full PPR. Like there are, a lot of reasons why these guys are working out like that. So now I'm up on the clock here. I was really hoping for Hopkins or Lamar Jackson. Of course, I missed out on both of them. And now there's the big question. Did he go? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I forgot to cross Derrick Henry off my list. So I was like, is Derrick Henry available and can I take him here? At this point, I think I might just run it back with Aaron Jones like I did last year in the second round. I'm still getting that running back I like. And yeah, I think there was a tier drop off there after Hopkins. So yeah, I'm going to go with Aaron Jones here, and we'll see what the guys at the turn do.
So now we got Kelsey, Aaron Jones. I don't want to ask you any draft strategy specific questions right now, just in case someone in the room is watching the stream and we give away your strategy. So I will wait until you're on the clock for that. But I wanted to ask you about the Superflex Draft Guide, specifically the rankings cheat sheets, because you have two sets of rankings cheat sheets for non-auction leagues. You have what you call QB aggression and QB light. Can you kind of like run us down what those are and why you go about that way in our Superflex Draft Guide?
Yeah, and to be clear, even the auction values are shown both ways. There's a QB value ranking and a QB aggression value or ranking. And the reason I give two sets of rankings with respect to how quarterbacks are valued is because different leagues treat the quarterback position in different ways. Like looking at this draft, this is a 12-team super flex, only two quarterbacks in the first round. Like a lot of casual players or people in home leagues are going to look at this draft board and be like, my league would never do that. The quarterbacks always go higher than that. And so I want to acknowledge that these rooms where quarterbacks are more highly valued exist, and present an option for the rankings to those people to say, okay, look, if your room is more aggressive with quarterbacks, use these rankings instead. It's not the way I would draft personally. Like you can see what I'm doing here. Like I've started off with two non-QBs in the first two rounds, but there are other rooms where you need to push quarterbacks up, and that's what the QB aggression rankings are for.
All right, we'll get back to that. I do have a follow-up question. So Joe Mixon was the last pick. We're in the third round now. Pete Henry, and then you kind of walk us through now again what you're thinking with your speed on the clock.
Yeah, I had a little bit of hope that AJ Brown would make it back to me there. He did not. I believe I missed out on Eckler a while ago, right? Yeah, Eckler is long gone. So there's that drop off in running back. So I'm not really looking at running back. For me, it comes down to a quarterback or a wide receiver. And at this point, looking at the QBs who are available, I do feel like there is some value here. There's Dak Prescott and Russell Wilson. And I do have Dak ranked higher. I think the injury concern is legitimate. But I still think I'm going to run with it. I feel like the upside is a little bit higher for Dak Prescott, just based upon the pace that we expect them to play with. And there have been reports that the Seahawks are going to play faster with Russell Wilson, but those are just reports, right? We know that the Cowboys are going to play fast. So I'm going to take Dak here in the third, and I feel a little shaky about it, but considering how many picks it's going to be before it comes back to me, I like getting that one locked in quarterback. I'm a little concerned that I don't have any receivers yet in this PPR format, but I do have Kelsey, who is effectively a receiver, more or less.
The one thing I do like about this start is you've left yourself a lot of open avenues in the mid rounds to kind of play around with the roster construction, just because it is so varied with the multiple quarterbacks, the multiple running backs, the multiple receivers. You got one player at the position where it's very top heavy in running back. Then you got one of the top three tight ends. And then now you don't really have to worry about that QB2. It's like you're not forced into having to use an early pick on that second quarterback if you don't want to, unless like the room just decides to decimate the position in these next two rounds by the time you're on the clock. I don't personally see that happening, but it does give you a lot of flexibility in terms of what you want to do. And you waited on I know a lot of people say wide receiver is deep, but then you look at it's not that deep, but it is a lot deeper than the running back position. So it is the one position that you can wait on, because I feel like you're still going to get a pretty damn good receiver as your top receiver when you have to focus on drafting multiple quarterbacks, multiple tight ends, tight end premium. It's definitely different than most like standard super flex drafts.
If I was going to take a wide receiver in that spot, it would have been Allen Robinson. So it's no surprise to see him go right after. And look at Shawn and Ben embracing the tight end premium, taking TJ Hawkinson in the third round. I get it, but that is not a pick I would make. As much as I liked Kelsey at 3 overall, like Hawkinson in the third is a bridge too far for me.
I'm not going to lie. If this was my draft and I was in that second, third round where you'd start with Travis Kelce, I would highly considered Kyle Pitts going with a double tight end start. And I might have even gone with a triple tight end start, just because I just love looking at all those tight ends on my roster, especially in a league where you can start more than one and you have that premium scoring bonus. But again, I'm also weird when it comes to fantasy football. So I'm on team Shawn and Ben going with those two early tight ends.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. You tend to have a very strong affinity for tight ends and for wide receivers early in drafts, and that doesn't jive with a lot of people's sensibilities. And in general, Mine are a little different, but yeah, I definitely am all about the balance, and that is kind of what you see with my start here. I like having that flexibility, in theory, to find the value falling to me in the next rounds. Now, with that said, the benches in this league are pretty shallow, so you don't want to be like, at some point you want to lean into one position, and I'm not sure what position that's going to be for me, but you want to be locked up at one position to where you can allocate more bench spots somewhere else. This is a very typical best ball type of strategy. And in a league like this, where the benches are shallow, that is something that is on my mind, where I want to make sure that I only have to take one backup wide receiver or something like that. And maybe the bye weeks don't work out for me immediately, but I can figure that out in season. Like, I just want either my running backs, my wide receivers, or my quarterbacks to be pretty locked in, so that I don't have to worry about shuffling a bunch of pieces in and out of my bench. I want to reserve that bench space for high upside.
See, now this is why I'm the host asking the questions and you're the expert drafting. And as the host, I'm going to welcome in our first guest of the show. He just made a pick at 3.6, taking Najee Harris. It's Matt from Draft Sharks. Matt, how are you doing tonight? Please tell me how I can pronounce your last name correctly.
It is Schauf, and I'm doing great tonight. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. As you can see, you can find Matt on Twitter at Schauf DS from Draft Sharks. That's what the DS stands for. How are you feeling with your draft start?
I'm feeling pretty good. I always just kind of lean on the Draft Sharks war room for this draft because I don't know how to value all these guys in this system that Mike sets up. I mean, I look at it a little bit before, but I would be guessing. And honestly, I think most years I end up starting out with some receivers because we see running backs go early. Quarterbacks are obviously going to get pushed up. So I think there's some wide receiver value early in these drafts.
So yeah, you started with two receivers, then you pivoted to the running back position. Without giving anything away to Greg, who you're drafting against, talking to in the stream, can you walk us through a little bit of how you're planning to game this next pick? Like, you don't have to give away a complete strategy who you want it, but kind of like walk us through your process.
Right now I'm scouting kickers because I think nobody else is really looking at those, so I think I can gain an advantage. No, I mean, I'm obviously watching where everybody's going to see, if there might be a run somewhere, such as 3 tight ends in the past 4 picks. I tend to lean away from runs like that, unless, I'm getting like the last player in a tier, and I think that there's a big difference in grabbing that guy. But otherwise, it's really just kind of trying to lean away from where the trend's going, as long as it doesn't leave me short there, and making sure that I don't wait too long on quarterback here, because that's really, I think, the one spot where you can just run out of real options. I mean, it's gonna get ugly at wide receiver and running back, but I think quarterback's really the only spot where you just find a point where you're like, oh man, I missed it, and all the starters are gone.
So we just saw Aaron Rodgers go 407 to Mr. Bob Harris. Only 7 quarterbacks so far through this draft. Do you find that's on par with this league? Are you surprised there hasn't been more quarterbacks drafted?
Well, that's one thing I like about this league. I mess with Mike about the setup, but the fact that you have to start 6 wideouts and 3 running backs and a couple of tight ends, it makes it not weigh it too heavily toward quarterbacks. So I think it's fair so far. And I'm also in the midst of a slow draft for a Superflex league on FFPC. And that one, like, every quarterback I've heard of was gone by the end.
They go so high in those FFPC leagues. It's crazy.
I was shocked. I mean, I would looked at ADP going in, and I was still shocked at how quickly they came off the board.
All right, so we're now seeing a couple of quarterbacks go back to back. Do we think we're on the verge of a mini quarterback run?
It seems like we might be there, but I don't know. Like, again, there's a lot of restraint in this draft room when it comes to quarterbacks. All
right, so Matt, it's your turn to pick now. Let's see how he goes with this one.
Yeah, when you get a group of, experts together, nobody wants to take quarterbacks early. Everybody wants to lay back and not be the guy jumping on quarterbacks. And then you get the format, which makes it even a little bit more challenging. So I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see runs. We'll see when people start to get a little bit nervous. I started looking at the position there, to be honest, but I'm still feeling pretty good about my options.
I love the Robert Woods pick. He was top wide receiver on my board. That was a nice one.
Thank you.
So we mentioned a few times, it is start 6 receivers. Technically, you could start 7 if you wanted to put a receiver in your super flex spot. You've drafted 3 so far. The first team with 3 receivers. Do you plan on going with a wide receiver heavy approach, or is this was like where you saw the value and you wanted to go that way?
Yeah, I mean, it's really for me about following the value through these, and I've specifically been looking at guys that I can trust for weekly volume. It was, the first round, for example, it was Devontae Adams or Tyreek Hill, and I leaned Devontae Adams for a bit more of the target certainty. I took Najee Harris as my first running back. It was kind of him or Nick Chubb there. And again, I just kind of lean toward the volume, trying to with these deeper starting lineups. And sorry, Shouty is trying to fight with me here, being heard. So I leaned volume there too, figuring that I'm a little bit more likely to get the touch volume every week from Najee Harris than with Nick Chubb. So I guess that's been my thing so far, is trying to look for volume so that they can be guys that I just leave in the starting lineup and they'll give me nice floors, even if somebody else might be, I don't know, a slightly better bet for ceiling. I don't know. I don't know if Nick Chubb is a better ceiling bet than Najee Harris.
So, Greg, it is your turn. I saw kind of a tick there. Were you upset that Amari Cooper went right before you?
I may or may not have wanted to stack Dak Prescott with Amari Cooper. may or may not have. I am looking at wide receiver here. I think I've waited far too long to get my first one. And I mean, it's a little scary because of the age and the injury concerns, but I'm going with Julio Jones.
Okay, so far we've seen 17 receivers, 14 running backs, 8 quarterbacks, 7 tight ends. You did take Dak Prescott in round 3. In hindsight, are you still okay with that Dak Prescott pick, or do you think it might have been a little early?
No, I think that's probably where he should have gone. I mean, what I really could have done there is just leaned a little bit more into the late round quarterback mindset. I'm probably still going to end up doing that or have to do that with my QB2 and QB3 anyway, which is why I was relatively comfortable making the Prescott pick when I did. But seeing where Russell Wilson went so many picks later, it doesn't feel great. I feel like I gave up a little bit of value there. I don't see that big of a difference between Dak and Wilson. But yeah, I mean, it's possible I should have taken a wide receiver or running back in that spot, to be fair, just to, again, leverage the fact that QB is pretty deep. There are usable guys in the lower tiers, whereas in the lower tiers of running back, the lower tiers of wide receiver, the usable guys are a little bit more sparsely populated.
So while Greg thinks what he's going to do with his next pick, Matt, I kind of want to ask about tight ends. Greg and I talked about how much I love tight ends. And in this draft, we saw Matthew Berry take Mark Andrews and Logan Thomas back-to-back in rounds 3 and 4. If you are in Mr. Berry's position right now, are you happy with those 2 tight ends? Would you look to get a third tight end in like the mid rounds, or would you just completely forget about the position? How would you be going about it if that was your team?
Well, Greg mentioned the short bench. I think I'd be waiting until late if I took 2 of those tight ends early. I wouldn't. Logan Thomas wouldn't have been my second one, but I mean, if he's your guy, I think that you're trusting those 2 guys to just carry you at tight end until bye week. So just be one later one. I think there are a fair number of later round tight ends this year. Sal, since you mentioned the late round quarterback thing earlier, is it blowing anybody else's mind to be looking late round quarterback in a draft where JJ Zachariason took the 3rd quarterback off the board? I'm not sure what to do with myself now.
I think we make fun of JJ every year whenever we see him take a quarterback early. It's a weird contrast when we grew up reading his work about the late round quarterback strategy, and then there he is taking a quarterback in the second round. It's a good way to just like tease him and make fun of him. But the one thing that is kind of interesting to me is that we're just through round 5. Jared, your teammate over Draft Sharks, took his first quarterback, the 9th quarterback overall. Like, we're still kind of technically in. I mean, it depends. Everyone's rankings and tiers are different, but to me, we're still in the QB1 tier that hasn't really broken through all the way yet, and we're in round 5 of Superflex Draft. And here we go. Greg is on the clock.
I took Dante Johnson, and I feel a little dirty about it. Like, I mean, I like Dante a lot, but as my wide receiver 2 in this league, it feels a little suboptimal. And DJ Moore was the other guys I was weighing him against. What do you think about those 2, Matt? DJ Moore versus Dante Johnson?
I'm not sure what to feel about DJ Moore. I like the player, but it's just there's so much wide receiver talent there, and now they bring in the quarterback that played with Robbie Anderson before. I can see the breakout path, but I can't walk it with him this year, I guess.
Yeah, I have him ranked back to back. I was really struggling with that, and ultimately it did come down to Yeah, that quarterback connection, to be honest. Like we saw what Dante Johnson was getting from Ben Roethlisberger game to game, which is so many targets. And DJ Moore, gets his fair share of targets too, but quarterback change there. They add Terrace Marshall. McCaffrey's back. Like, I just don't know if the workload is going to be there in the same way for him that it was last season, the season before. And just in general, if he's going to be more of a roller coaster ride, that's like my fear. But he is really talented and he's been really good through the early parts of his career that, like, I don't know. I see the argument for him, but I'm like you, like I couldn't pull the trigger there. I went with Johnson instead.
Yeah, and I talk about it being crowded in Carolina. It's crowded in Pittsburgh too, obviously. But I mean, Dante Johnson was just such a safe bet for targets week to week, and just so good last year when all three of those wideouts were on the field.
Mm-hmm.
So 8 of the last 9 picks have been wide receivers. So it looks like we've hit that wide receiver run. Matt, you are on the clock now. How are you thinking about this pick?
I was tempted to go another position, but I think I'm going to have to go ahead and take one of my top 12 quarterbacks. And it's Matthew Stafford as my first guy, who happens to be a stack, but that's not necessarily the thing that won him over for me.
I want to point out to people watching this stream who are in a Superflex league that isn't a going deep league that this isn't really what a traditional Superflex draft board looks like. But like I said, we mentioned it before, 2 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 6 receivers, 2 tight ends, 2 tight end premium. So you kind of have to adjust for your league setting, which we spend many countless hours in articles and on Twitter telling people, know your league rules, know your league settings, know your draft room. So now we have 10 quarterbacks through the first 5 rounds. 2 of the, well, actually, each team remaining. Okay, so Jerry Jeudy just went from, I was just going to say every team still about the rest of this round already has 1 quarterback. When do you guys think we're going to see the first team take their second quarterback?
What do you think, Matt?
I think one of the next 2 rounds it's going to happen. I don't think that we're going to see many teams do it soon, but I think within the next 2 rounds, somebody's taking their second. We're just getting into that range where there's, some of the upside rookies. There's like the end of the, real top 12 starters. So I think it's coming.
Yeah. And at some point you have to try to leverage your roster at a specific position against the other teams. And we saw Matthew Berry do that with his 2 tight ends, right? Somebody's going to talk themselves into doing that with quarterbacks. I don't know who it's going to be. Maybe it'll be me. I don't know. But that's something that eventually is going to cross someone's mind to say, I don't really like my running back or wide receiver options here. So I'm just going to stack up the 13th best quarterback with the guy I drafted in the first 3 rounds or something like that. So, it's going to happen soon. Probably this round or next round would be my guess. I'm with that.
There we go. I mean, it just happened there with Bob Harris going with Jalen Hurts after he took Aaron Rodgers in the last round. Matt kind of touched on this when I was asking about Matthew Berry started with Mark Andrews, Logan Thomas. At the time, I didn't even realize that Matthew Berry took Logan Thomas before Kyle Pitts. I will be the first to admit this is the first draft I've seen Logan Thomas go before Kyle Pitts. So, Greg, I want to ask you, where would you have taken Kyle Pitts in this draft?
So I would take Pitts ahead of Logan Thomas, but it's not crazy to take Logan Thomas ahead of him. And Matthew Berry is a Washington guy, so that might explain it.
Would you say that these 7 tight ends who have gone kind of constitutes like the top echelon of the tight end position?
Yeah, I think that, and I think even Logan Thomas and Kyle Pitts are a little bit debatable. One, Pitts because we haven't done it yet, and Thomas because a lot has changed in that team context. But I think those are the clear top, I guess, top 7 to me? I don't know. What do you think, Matt?
Logan Thomas is a guy that's not there for me. I can see it a little bit more now given Curtis Samuel's kind of rough summer. But my issue is that he really padded his targets late last season. I mean, it was the last 6 weeks, he doubled his usage and consumed a lot of what he ended up getting for the season. So I don't think that he's going to I don't think he's going to repeat what it was in that portion. We'll see if he falls all the way back to what he was early in the season. But I think the early season pace is probably closer to what we'll get. I think probably something in between, but I guess more so than figuring out that specific target path, is there a couple guys still on the board that I think still have higher ceilings than what Logan Thomas does, assuming he doesn't get back into that 100+ target range like he got to late last year, which that's my shortfall. I don't think he's getting to that.
Yeah, and to be clear, I have Andrews, Pitts, and Hawkinson in a tier above Logan Thomas. So I do think that there's a gap there for sure. But in terms of guys that I would want to draft next out of the next tier, Thomas is at the top of that for me, especially in PPR. But you're right. If Samuel takes away too many targets, if they start to give more passes to Antonio Gibson, we could see that target volume dip for Thomas. But, I mean, it's not like their third wide receiver there. De'Ami Brown is exciting, but, Thomas was good last year. I think that they're going to continue to give him some work. So I think he's a safer tight end pick than a lot of the guys that are going to go later. But I agree. There are probably a few that might have higher upside, and we'll see where those guys go.
And it's tough because he's such an abnormal profile. Is you can look at him and say, well, he's ascending because he just became a full-time tight end. Or you can look at what he did and say, yeah, he's like 30. He wasn't a tight end until last year. Maybe he's Terrell Pryor. So, I mean, I could certainly see it going either way. I think it's fine to have him in that range.
Yep.
All right, so Matthew Berry just took Chris Carson here at the end of the 5th round. It has his first running back. How are we feeling about his start so far through 5 rounds? He took Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs to start. Then he took a couple tight ends. He's got Chris Carson now. He should be making another pick very soon here.
I'm not a fan of the double tap tight end where he did, but again, that's a format specific choice that can work, but it's not one that I would have made. So it's not really my style of drafting. But I can't necessarily argue with it. Like I think it's a fine start. Like the Diggs and Allen stack is great, and I really like where he got Chris Carson. To be honest, Carson was a player I was hoping was going to make it back to me. Yeah,
Carson's actually who I was hoping was going to make it back to me this round and who I was considering last time when I took my first quarterback. So I like Carson. I agree. I'm kind of like, I'm okay with the build of getting the 2 tight ends. I think I would feel better about it if it were different guys. And, they're both fine, but it is tight end premium, so 1.5 PPR. I think that pulls Mark Andrews away from the top 4 tight ends a bit, and it puts him even behind Kyle Pitts for me. And then, I just talked about my hesitation with Logan Thomas. So I guess if it were 2 really good tight ends early, then I'd feel okay, but I don't love those 2.
What about the combo that Shawn and Ben have with Darren Waller and TJ Hawkinson? Like, is that the type of combo you would feel better with?
Yeah. Yes. Now, obviously, the question there is the draft capital spent on it. We'll see. It's such kind of an oddball format that it's tough to look at it now and say, oh, they really screwed up.
So as Matt is about to make his pick, you guys did both mention Chris Carson as someone you were targeting. Greg, can you tell me what it is about Chris Carson that intrigued you?
Well, I mentioned it earlier, but there are rumblings that the Seahawks are going to play with a little bit more pace this year. I think that's good for anyone in an offense, period. Like that's why I took Dak ahead of, or as high as I did. And, with running backs as well, that's something you want to see, or just more plays, more carries, more opportunities. It's all about volume, right? And I just don't see the backs behind Chris Carson challenging him for that volume, whether it's Rashad Penny, who I have literally zero faith in. Like I'll never draft Rashad Penny. Like I'd probably draft Alex Collins before I draft Rashad Penny. But yeah, I don't know. I don't see anybody as good. Like I think Chris Carson is good, and he has a pretty locked in role on an offense that should play at a higher pace this year. I don't know. I just think that he's a good pick in that spot.
So Matt, you went with Miles Sanders there. Can you kind of tell us why you went with him maybe over a couple other running back options if you're thinking about that position?
Honestly, this might have been my first shrug emoji pick. I like Miles Sanders, the player, and I think ultimately I just kind of talked myself into the upside of him. I am an Eagles fan, but that doesn't really drive my picks at this point because I'm not a yell at the TV Eagles fan. I'm just kind of I hope the Eagles win this game fan at this point. So I think Miles Sanders is an upside player. I think that there's a chance that he regains some of the receiving stuff this year. I think that he's a good runner, and whatever he gets, he should be able to exploit that this year. And if Jalen Hurts is going well, running quarterbacks we've seen be good for the running game. So that can help Miles Sanders. I think he's going late enough that I'm not investing too much into buying the upside. Really, the piece that I need from him is to get that receiving back. And I've lost a month ago, I was like, oh, this is going to be a good year for Miles Sanders. And now I'm not feeling that as much because of the negative reports about him dropping the ball in camp and Kenneth Gainwell looking good and Boston Scott catching passes. So now it's more of like a draft Miles Sanders and cross my fingers than getting excited that I get him.
I've been sniped on wide receivers coming back this direction twice now. Jamar Chase was a tier above at the top of my queue. So I am going to pivot to running back here. And it's not really a great PPR pick, but I'm going to take Gus Edwards.
So let's talk about a couple of running backs put into the position of being the top back because of injury. James Robinson went earlier. He was the 17th running back taken. Gus Edwards just went. He's the 20th running back taken. In, let's say, a traditional 12-team, half PPR, non-Superflex league, what rounds would you be targeting guys like James Robinson and Gus Edwards?
Matt, you can start on this one.
For me, James Robinson and Gus Edwards would both be James Robinson probably by the end of round 4, and then Gus Edwards more of a round 5. Depending on exactly who's there, and it kind of gets into that range where it's likely that I've already gotten 2 running backs, and I'm looking wide receiver in there. So it hasn't come up for me in a live draft since J.K. Dobbins went down, but I think right in that range, like RB 24, 25, 26 is where Gus Edwards would make sense. I'm not sure what to expect from receptions, which, Greg just mentioned, but, it's a great situation and we're getting him for cheaper than we were getting Dobbins at least.
So Pete and Henry just took their first quarterback. That leaves Jeff Ratcliffe as the winner of the QB chicken game. He's the only drafter so far to not have a quarterback. So, Matt, let me ask you this question. If you're Jeff Ratcliffe right now, through 6 rounds, you haven't taken a quarterback yet. How are you feeling about that position, knowing as of right now, only 13 have gone?
I think you're feeling fine. I think most of us are probably not loading up, although you never know at this point who's going to go for a second. And I guess one kind of tougher spot here versus other leagues is that because you have such a short bench, it can be tougher to stash somebody like Trey Lance or Justin Fields. You would really like for all the guys on your roster to be weekly options. So I think we'll see Jeff attack it pretty soon here and not wait too much longer. And then I wouldn't be surprised if he goes for quarterback in 2 straight rounds.
Yeah, double taps it. That's generally the way I go when I wait this long on QB. That makes a lot of sense.
I feel like with his current strategy, he's going to be using he's going to be using 3 picks probably in the mid rounds on that quarterback position. Depending on who's still there, if none of these players ahead of him go with quarterback, because even still, if you're in the 7th round and if Jared, Pete, and Greg don't go with the quarterback again, you're still looking at the QB 14 in round 7, which is, I think, pretty good value in a Superflex league.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on deck here, and I'm debating what position matters the most to me right now. This is where it gets really tough, right? Because you have to start so many darn wide receivers, so many tight ends, like so many running backs that you're going to be weak somewhere. Where do you want to be weak? And how can you know where that's going to be this early in the draft? It's not straightforward.
So through your thought process right now, where would you be okay being the most weak at?
Well, I want to say tight end because I have Kelsey, but at the same time, like if I wait too long at tight end, then I'm not leveraging that advantage, right? I'm giving up the advantage I get with Kelsey by not taking another good one. But I do feel like there are a lot of good tight ends still left. With that said, a lot of the other drafters don't have one yet. Some of them only have one. So yeah, it's not like I am tempted to take a tight end, and there goes Trevor Lawrence. He was the quarterback I was thinking about in this spot, but I think I'm going to keep waiting at QB. So yeah, for me, it comes down to receiver or tight end in this spot. And I'm a little further behind at tight end or at wide receiver than I would want to be with my team. So I think that's probably where I should go with only 2 wide receivers rostered. But at the same time, like I do think I want to try to leverage that tight end advantage. And I'm talking myself out of it as we go here. This is always so tough.
I think that's one of probably the best thing about this league is it just makes you just go crazy with your roster decisions every single round as you try to build out your team.
Yeah.
But we'll wait to see what you do next before I ask you this next question because
I am going to take a tight end. I'm going to go with Tyler Higbee. And this is in part because I'm tilted that I didn't get Cooper Kupp earlier. But yeah, I do think I want to try to leverage the tight end position, and I like Higbee a lot. I don't have him too much further behind Noah Fant. I like Higbee's quarterback situation a little bit more. I think that Rams offense is going to be good. Like, for all the reasons that Matt liked Stafford, that's why I like Tyler Higbee. I think that the Rams are going to put up points this season.
So we spend a lot of time talking about getting one of the top 3 tight ends. You got Travis Kelce 103, but now you've just kind of been talking about how you wanted to leverage that to your advantage. If you did go with Kelce there, as you did 3rd overall, and didn't end up getting a second tight end early, would you feel in hindsight that was a wasted pick, or just you didn't take that pick to its full positional advantage?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't feel like I wasted it necessarily, but because in that case, you can just tell yourself the story that he's effectively a wide receiver for me. I took the Chiefs' #1 wideout in theory, or like their 1A or 1B to Tyreek Hill, which is still really good, right? And you get to plug him in at the tight end position. Like, there's a distinct advantage to having Travis Kelce on your roster in this format, no matter who your second tight end is, especially because you can stream that tight end 2 spot to some extent. Again, the benches are really short, so most people don't like to carry bench tight ends unless they have to. Like, most bench spots are dedicated to having backup QBs for bye weeks and injuries, running back stashes, because that's the lottery that everyone plays in fantasy football, is how can I find a running back who ascends into a starting role, and then wide receiver coverage, just because we have to start 6. Like, you kind of need to have a 7th or 8th wide receiver on your roster, and so that doesn't leave you a whole lot of bench space for the tight end position. And I found historically that means you can sometimes find playable guys off the waiver wire. With that said, I do feel like there is a reason that Shawn and Ben won by taking 2 tight ends early last year. Like, we see Matthew Berry doing that here. I'm trying to do a different version of that with Kelce as like a clear-cut #1 and Higbee is kind of like an upside play. But we'll see. Like, I still have Higbee in the same tier with like a couple other tight ends who are still available. So maybe I should have waited and just tried to see if one of them fell to me in the next round. But at the same time, like, I just want to be invested in that offense to some extent, the passing offense specifically. And I'd like Higbee a lot. So I just made the pick.
All right, so Matt, you went with Josh Jacobs there. Can you explain your thought process?
Yeah, I was actually surprised that he made it back to me, because it was between Josh Jacobs and Miles Sanders last time. I mean, he's going to get carries. He's not going to catch as many passes as we want, but he's probably going to be top 5 in the league in carries. I need to start 3 of them, so I don't need to – it's not like a typical situation where I need to decide whether to start Josh Jacobs and then he's touchdown reliant. He's going to be in my lineup, and I'm just going to hope that the touchdowns work out most weeks. I think he's underrated for his fantasy potential. I know he's going to be boom bust because he doesn't catch as many passes as we would like, but the carries are there. He gets like a Nick Chubb level workload. He's not Nick Chubb, but he's going 4 rounds later than Nick Chubb. So I feel like there's pretty much only upside from where he's going.
Yeah, that's a nice value for sure. I mean, considering how we were both talking about the Chris Carson pick and just having that kind of locked in workload. And again, like, Jacobs, now that they brought in Kenyon Drake, doesn't have as solidified of a workload, but we know he's a really good rusher, and they are going to lean on him to some extent in Vegas. So yeah, I mean, getting him in the 7th round that's a fine pick.
Yeah, I'm certainly curious to see how much they give to Kenyon Drake, but I mean, from what John Gruden says, it sounds like they're planning to not alter Josh Jacobs' workload on the ground too much.
What do you think about Mike Davis? Because he went. I probably would have taken Mike Davis over Josh Jacobs, if only because, again, I see a clearer path to receiving work there and just an overall kind of bell cow role. But what are your thoughts on Davis, and why didn't you take him over Josh Jacobs?
I mean, honestly, the reason I didn't take him probably is mostly because I've spent most of the offseason talking about why he shouldn't be getting drafted where he's being drafted. At this point, I can see it a little bit more because the Falcons have not added anything. And I would have guessed that they would have been in for some of the guys that have moved by now. So I think Mike Davis makes more sense to me now than he did, but it's still a limited player in a situation we don't know is good. I think we're projecting a little bit with Arthur Smith from what he did in Tennessee and just assuming that things are going to be positive in Atlanta, that it's going to be a productive offense, that Mike Davis is going to be a backfield leader. I think that there is just as good a chance that it is the committee that he has indicated it would be, that Mike Davis is okay, but doesn't do anything special. So, I mean, I've biased myself against him, and I don't know, I can't work past it, but I'm not too worried about missing something special.
Right.
So up until this point, it's been very best ball heavy drafting. We talk a lot about the stacks. I wanted to throw up a question here we got from the audience. Tim Talbage over from 4-4 and Rotoviz was wondering, let's say if you guys were Shawn and Ben, you just ended up taking Joe Burrow as your second quarterback. Before that, you had taken Chase Claypool when Jamar Chase was on the board. Would you have regretted that pick? What do you guys think about the idea of just stacking overall in a redraft league?
I'm not a big proponent of it. I don't necessarily. I mean, actually, in a format like this where it's all play, it's a little different. In head-to-head matchups, I think it can give you too much variance sometimes. With that said, I'm not opposed to it. Especially if they're players I like. Like if I got to stack Matthew Stafford with Tyler Higbee, I'd be all about that. So yeah, I mean, for me, it just comes down to like, does the draft board play out in a way to where I'm getting players I want? If they happen to be stacks, fine. If not, no big deal. And otherwise, I won't like overdo it. Like if I already have one pass catcher from one team, I might draft a second, but I almost certainly won't draft a third. But I don't know how you feel about it, Matt. What do you say?
Yeah, I would say I'll use it as a tiebreaker. Like, if, for example, when I was looking at Matthew Stafford versus the other quarterbacks, I already had Robert Woods. Maybe it helps me with Matthew Stafford, but I'm not planning it out in just a 12-team league. I think it's more of an ultimate upside play than it is helping my team week to week through the season. And like you said, it can kind of handcuff you by just giving you too much week to week variance if it's a rough week for the offense.
All right, so Matt's going to be picking very soon. We have his Draft Sharks teammate here, Jared Smola at Jared Smola DS on Twitter. Jared, how are you doing tonight? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. I was trying to get on a podcast without Matt on it.
I'm everywhere.
We can kick him off right now if you want.
It's going well, though. Thanks for having me on. This is always one of my favorite drafts to do just because it's so different. You kind of get stale doing the same drafts over and over again. This one it's so unpredictable just because of the format.
So as people can see up on the screen, you did have the 101, very easy with Christian McCaffrey, but I kind of want to ask you how you were feeling when you were on the clock in round 2-3 turn.
Yeah, I mean, I'll never complain about getting the one pick, but having to wait so long between picks, especially in this format, can be tough because it's tougher to predict where the runs are going to come. Mixon's a guy I love, so I was kind of hoping he'd make it back to me. I like kind of having those two hammers at running back. I like trying to get stud backs in this league because with the small benches, you can't afford to stash a bunch of these, handcuff types, the Alex Madisons, the Tony Jones. There's just not enough bench spots. So I like kind of being solid at running back and not having to worry about that so much. And then AJ Brown was kind of an easy pick for me too. He was kind of the last wide receiver in his tier for me. Tiers are so important to me in this league. Just kind of trying to grab the last guys in tiers when possible, especially like I said, being at the turn here and having to wait so long between picks.
So what made you go with Noah Fant over Greg went with Tyler Higbee. So what had your thought process there with Fant as your first tight end?
Yeah, I was between Fant and another wide receiver there. I was looking at Devontae Smith, Laviska Shenault. That was kind of a case, and it's looking like I played it wrong, but I was worried there was going to be a tight end run between my 7th and 8th round picks. And I have Fant along with a couple other guys kind of in a tier. I figured the rest of those guys would be gone when it gets back to me, which might not be the case. But kind of I just wanted to make sure I got one of my top 10 or so tight ends. The position was already thin, and man, it's gotten thinner with some of these injuries and some of this usage we've seen in the preseason.
So Greg's 3 picks away. Matt, I want to ask you about your pick there. We just saw Trey Lance and Justin Fields go back-to-back, these mid-round rookie-hyped quarterbacks. If Lance was available for you, would there have been a debate between Lance and Fields? If not, what is it about Fields you like?
It's Justin Fields for me because I think there's a better chance that he starts earlier in the season. I think that there's a better chance that San Francisco is decent this year and is winning with Jimmy Garoppolo in the lineup. And in that case, I would think that they would stick with what's working. I don't think Chicago is going to be very good. I think that the over-under for Justin Fields taking over for Andy Dalton is week 4 because they have road trips to the Browns and the Rams within the first 3 games. Matt Nagy's got to be feeling his buns getting toasty. I think it's going to be Justin Fields soon, and then once he gets on the field, the upside's the same for both of them. They can both run, they can both throw. But I believe in Justin Fields getting on the field early and then being a good player when he gets there.
All right, so we got Pete, then Jared will be double tapping at the 8-9 round. Greg, you went with Jalen Waddle. I know over at 4 for 4, it's very Waddle pro website with John Paulson almost every day in Slack telling us how much he loves Jalen Waddle. Can you tell us why you love Jalen Waddle?
I mean, I love Waddle for a lot of the same reasons that John does. And a lot of it's by osmosis, right? Like Matt Harmon, big on Waddle and reception perception. There's the connection there with Tua from college. There's the fact that Devontae Parker has trouble getting open. There's trouble with Will Fuller playing a full season. And I think there are reasons to believe that the Miami offense is ascending to some extent. And so I want to, tie myself to that a little bit. I'm a little worried about that division they play in. The Buffalo defense and the New England defense are both pretty solid. I mean, the Jets, whatever. But yeah, I like Waddle. I like potentially getting a wide receiver 1 for a team in this PPR format in round 8. Like, I don't need Waddle to blow the barn doors off. I just need him to be kind of a routine starter for me in this spot. I think he's capable of that in year 1.
So we finally saw Mr. Jeff Ratcliffe take his first quarterback. I'm not going to lie. I was kind of hoping that he was not going to take a quarterback until like round 15 or round 16. I just wanted to see how long he could last with that game of QB chicken. Having said that, though, how do you guys feel about this value pick of Matt Ryan as the QB 18? Matt, we can start with you on here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fine time for Matt Ryan. I don't think any of us is really excited about him at this point, but I think that I'd be curious to know if Jeff would have wanted one of the rookies, or if by waiting this long, he wants somebody that he knows is going to be on the field from the start of the season, just to make sure that he's not locked out of having 2 starting options early in the year. But, tight at QB 18, I think it's a fine area. I don't expect Matt Ryan to blow that spot away, though.
So Greg's had a very pensive look on his face.
I'm not excited about this spot. I feel like I talked Jared into Tua there. I was hoping that Tua was going to slide through.
Well, walk us through your strategy there, Jared, because you end up with, mentioned Fant earlier, but now you went with Goddard there as your second tight end, followed that up with Tua. What made you go with a second tight end this early? And then tell us why you like Tua here.
Yeah, so I mentioned that tier of tight ends when I took Fant. To me, it's Fant, Higbee, and Goddard kind of in that tier. And when it gets past those guys, that's when the question marks start for me. So, if I had known Goddard would make it back to me, I probably wouldn't have taken Fant in the 7th. But I'm okay with having those 2 guys. Like I feel like I have 2 solid starting tight ends where a lot of teams here are going to be, hurting for that tight end 2 spot. So I'm happy to get those 2 guys. And then Tua, I was debating between a quarterback or a wide receiver or a running back there. There are guys I liked at all 3 positions. But man, being on the turn, I was just worried what was still going to be there for me at quarterback when it got back to me. And so, and Tua is a guy I like. I think he's looked like a guy ready to take the next step in preseason. He has much better weapons this season with Waddle and Fuller joining Devontae Parker and Gesicki. So I think Tua should beat that quarterback 19 price tag I just got him at.
So now that you do have 2 tight ends, are you okay waiting a bit for that 3rd tight end? Are you thinking you might not even draft a 3rd tight end?
Yeah, I probably won't draft a 3rd unless I see big value. Again, we only have 5 bench spots to work with here, so I probably won't take a 3rd tight end.
All right, so we saw Jeff ended up double tapping the quarterback position. I think he got some pretty good value there with Ryan Fitzpatrick as his QB 20. I know there's been spurts here and there in the offseason where we're all very high on Ryan Fitzpatrick. Then some people started wondering, well, what if Taylor Heineke ends up being the quarterback? Back to everyone loves Ryan Fitzpatrick again. While Matt makes his pick, Greg, why don't you talk to us a little bit about where you have Fitzpatrick right now?
So I actually have Fitzpatrick ahead of the player he drafted before. I mean, back-to-back in the same tier, Fitzpatrick and Matt Ryan. So I have them both really close. I think, let's see, 15. That's like QB 17, 18, 19 range for me. And what did they go as? The QB 18 and QB 20? So, I think that's right on schedule to me.
Okay. And Matt, you ended up going with Pittman there. We saw T.Y. Hilton is going to be out for a few weeks. I'm not sure if that really matters in the long run for fantasy, but What is it about Pittman that made you go there with him?
I mean, the T.Y. Hilton thing can only help, right? We were already looking at Michael Pittman as kind of a potential breakout type guy, especially now that we know Carson Wentz should be back at least early in the season, if not even by week 1. So I just think it's in the 40s at wideout. He is somebody that could well outplay that ADP. I was thinking about going tight end since I don't have one yet, but Jared said after the guy that he took, it gets questionable there, and I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between the next group of players. So I just didn't feel compelled to reach there when I liked the wide receiver better. Plus my Draft Sharks war room was telling me that wide receiver was the pick, so I went with it.
I had him really close to Mike Williams, who I took just before. I was debating those two head to head, and ultimately just went for the guy in the offense I like a little bit more, but I think that there might be more upside with Pittman to really take that step and be like a true alpha receiver for his team. So, I mean, I might have egg on my face for that one by the end of the year. We'll see.
Well, and if you had taken Pittman and left Mike Williams, he probably would have been my pick. So they were right there for me as well.
So here's a question I have for you guys, because we've spent a lot of digital ink this offseason trying to decipher this San Francisco 49ers running back room. Mostert went there in round 8 to Jason. How are you guys feeling about Mostert versus Trey Sermon this offseason?
Yeah, I prefer Sermon of the two. I mean, both guys are going to be involved. I mean, Shanahan going back through most of his history prefers to use multiple backs. I just don't trust Mostert to hold up over the course of the season. I think Sermon has a better chance to do so. That's why I prefer him. I mean, I think both those guys are going to be super efficient. I mean, you saw in that final preseason game, just the running lanes they had when Trey Lance was out there, running some of that read option stuff. Just the threat of his legs. I think both those guys are going to be super, super efficient.
Yeah, same for me. I have them really close together. I think actually they're back-to-back in my rankings. In PPR, I don't know if that's necessarily correct. Half PPR, I think that they're close enough. Like, mostly I just don't want to have to choose, so I'll just take whoever goes second of the two if I'm looking to draft one of those guys. But I like them both.
Greg, this is a question for you. We're halfway through the draft now. You and Jason are the only two teams with just one quarterback. How are you feeling about that with now 22 quarterbacks off the board?
I'm fine with it. I believe that there are about, I don't know what the exact number is. I want to say it's 27 or 28 quarterbacks that I'd be comfortable with in a 2-quarterback league. And so you got 12 teams here. If everyone has 2, that's only 24. That means that there are 4 leftover starters who are okay or like good enough. It might put me into a position where I need to double tap the position or something like that, like take 2 back-to-back. But overall, like I'm comfortable taking from this tier because I have a solid starter, like a solid QB number 1 in Dak Prescott in theory, fingers crossed he stays healthy. And then I feel like because I've waited on quarterback, I'm stacking up advantages at other positions. So even if my QB2 is not exciting, I think that player will be serviceable. And so I'm comfortable in this sort of scenario.
Okay. And so, yeah. So you and Jason with just one quarterback as he ended up going with Trey Sermon. Matt, you are on the clock. How are you thinking about this pick right now?
Well, I just entered it, and I took Evan Engram, and I would feel great about it if he hadn't just hurt his calf, but I just searched for the latest and found that they're saying he might not be available for week 1. So that tells me that they think there's a pretty good chance he could be back by week 2. So I'm willing to take a little bit of risk that I'm short in week 1 for a guy that I think has a lot more upside than anybody else left on the board. I think a healthy Evan Engram could easily finish among the top 8 tight ends this year, especially with the injuries around him in the Giants wide receiver core.
So since you did draft Ingram, we're talking a little bit about the Giants. How are you feeling about Daniel Jones? Sometimes I'm afraid to mention his name out in public because they're a very pro Daniel Jones breakout or Daniel Jones sucks crowd. So which way are you leaning with Daniel Jones?
I guess I would say I'm in between. I was feeling a little bit more pro Daniel Jones rebound early in the offseason, but then we've got Kenny Golladay being out for a while. They drafted Kadarius Toney, who seems like he's probably going to basically redshirt this year. We've got Evan Ingram's injury now. There's just the Saquon Barkley, we're not totally sure about him heading into the season. So I would say that I'm comfy with Daniel Jones on the bench for my fantasy team because he did improve a bit as a deep ball passer last year. He has a bit of the rushing upside. So there's enough there that he could be fine. He could be Derek Carr in terms of fantasy production. Maybe he sneaks into the bottom of the top 12. I'm not betting big money on it, but I think that Daniel Jones will be a serviceable fantasy QB for Superflex this year.
Okay. So Greg is on the board. Jared will be up soon. Elijah Moore just went. Earlier this offseason, he became like the very trendy wide receiver target in the Jets offense. But I was kind of wondering what you guys think of Corey Davis.
I like both those guys. I've been drafting them both all offseason. Davis's ADP has shot up just because, we've seen him be a target magnet in the preseason. I think largely in part because Elijah Moore hasn't been on the field. I think Davis is kind of going where he should have been going all along now. Elijah Moore, I think, is still undervalued because, we haven't seen him. I think that quad injury kind of, damn it, I really want to Kareem Hunt.
That was a nice pick.
So I think Moore is still underrated just because, he missed all the preseason with that quad injury. I think those two guys are going to be the clear top two targets for the Jets.
All right, so while Jared is on the clock here, Greg, you just went with Marquise Callaway. Let's talk about just the Saints offense in general. Jameis Winston was named starting quarterback. People now are kind of back into Alvin Kamara. Michael Thomas was put on PUP, so we know he's going to be out for at least the first 6 games with that early bye, probably out until at least week 7. Adam Troutman was injured. Traquan Smith is still there. How are we feeling about this offense overall for a fantasy perspective?
I don't feel great about it, despite the fact that I just took Callaway, mostly because I'm curious to see how well Jameis Winston fits in and how much of the work still goes to Taysom Hill and goal line packages and things like that. But I am nervous about it. With that said, like Callaway's looked great in preseason. He was actually pretty good last year in the limited time that he got to. And like I had him stashed on a dynasty roster of mine. So I'm a little familiar with Marquez Callaway. I'm a fan of his work. And so I think that as the primary receiver there, he could, really excel. So yeah, I'm skeptical about the offense as a whole, mostly just like not knowing exactly where all the work's going to go. Like we know Kamara's going to get his, but beyond that, it's kind of a big question mark. Like how much are they going to air it out to a player like Callaway? But there is reason for optimism. I'm just not sure if it's going to bear out in the long run. What do you guys think?
I like Callaway for as long as Michael Thomas is out. I think, some people don't seem to be factoring that into the equation. Thomas will I think, be back, at some point this season. And at that point, I think Callaway might be kind of tough to rely on from a week-to-week basis. But, at least for the first 5 games now, we know Thomas is out. So I think Callaway is going to be, at least like a rock-solid RB or wide receiver 3 during that time.
Yeah, I like going ahead and taking Callaway for what we know is coming, that time without Michael Thomas. And then beyond that, we really don't know. I mean, Michael Thomas, we assume will be back at some point, but this is still an injury from last year. So I don't think he's a definite. And then even if he's back, Traquan Smith certainly hasn't proved that he belongs in the starting lineup. So it might just be Thomas and Marquez Callaway even after Thomas returns. So I think as long as we don't have to take Callaway in like round 7 or higher of typical 12-team drafts, I'm okay with where he's going, although he's really climbed over the past few days. So I'm a little bit worried that we might be getting to that range.
So with this being a Superflex league, Greg, you end up going with Zach Wilson as your QB2. What was it about him over the likes of other quarterbacks? We saw Ben Roethlisberger went right after him.
I actually have Roethlisberger ranked higher, and I would have taken Roethlisberger if Prescott didn't have the same bye. So that was why I went with Zach Wilson, and Wilson was kind of just like the best of the rest. I mentioned briefly that I don't think the Jets defense is that good. I think they're going to have to throw a fair amount. Like that's risky sometimes with a rookie quarterback like Zach Wilson, but he's looked pretty decent in the preseason. Like the receivers there are pretty darn good. And so, yeah, I like the changes that we've seen for the Jets this offseason. Speaking of reason for optimism, like Adam Gase getting out of there is just such a big boon to everybody on that team from a fantasy perspective that, I don't know, I'm pretty excited about the possibility of Zach Wilson. But more than anything, it was kind of just a warm body pick. And like I said, I would have taken Roethlisberger to stack with Dante Johnson if they didn't share a bye week with Dak Prescott.
So, Jared, without giving away too much of your strategy, I do want to ask you about your running back build so far. You did take 2 picks within the first 3 rounds, and you haven't looked at the position since. Who are some guys, generally speaking, in like drafts you kind of like in the later rounds?
Yeah, so this range coming up is the range I kind of like hitting for my RB3, RB4, and it tends to be like the 9th or 10th round in one quarterback drafts with the Superflex. Gets pushed down. So I guess I'll just throw out names. I don't think I'm going to be impacting anyone drafting here, but Jamal Williams I like a lot. I still like taking shots on both Bucs running backs, Fournette and Ronald Jones. Like they might be tough to rely on at least to start, but like if one guy goes down or if one guy just emerges, like there's so much upside just in that offense. It's going to be such a good offense, so many touchdown opportunities, and Bernard's going to steal the pass catching work. But I mean, Fournette and Jones are going to be the guys getting the work around the goal line. So those are guys I like taking in this kind of range of running back.
So Matt, we mentioned it was an intentional stacking earlier with Woods and Stafford, but now you have another stack in Fields and Darnell Mooney. Tell us a little bit about why you went with Mooney.
I mean, he was the next wide receiver on my board. I think there's big upside to him. I think that he was really stifled a bit by the quarterback play there. And I think that when Justin Fields gets into the lineup this year, he could really unlock some big upside for Darnell Mooney this year. I was looking at another position that will remain unnamed for now and came across a bye week issue. So that factored into it a little bit. We'll see if that comes back to bite me and if I made the wrong choice. But I will say I was considering – no, you know what? I'm not giving away anything else until I make my next pick.
Come on. I gave away my running back. Come on.
All right. Well, I'll pivot here to – go ahead if you have something else to say. No, I'll pivot to the Patriots offense. I want to ask you about the receivers there with the news that Mac Jones is starting. He just went here in the 11th round to JJ's his QB3. He also took Trey Lance earlier. We saw Jacoby Myers go earlier in round 9. If you were to target a Patriots receiver in, say, a non-going deep league, about who would it be between Myers and Eckler, and in which rounds would you guys start thinking about them? If you want to go first, Greg.
I'm sorry, I was in my own little world there. Let somebody else answer the question.
How about you, Jared?
Yeah, it's Myers for me. I just think you look back at what this Patriots offense does. Like they target the intermediate over the middle slot receiver, and Myers will play some on the outside, but I do think he's going to be their slot guy when they go 3 wide receivers. So I can't remember who it was, but someone was rewatching the Patriots preseason game, saying that Nelson Aguilar always been doing is just running go routes. Like he's just kind of the clear out guy. So I think Myers is going to be the top wide receiver there. I still think there's a chance like Jonnu Smith or maybe even Hunter Henry, is in the mix to lead that team in targets. I think the tight ends are going to be a big part of that passing game.
Matt, you have any thoughts on the Patriots receivers?
I agree with Jared. It's not really a shock because we spent a lot of time offline talking about this stuff, but I think it's Jacoby Myers first, just because that's where all the buzz is. I thought Nelson Aguilar was overpaid to begin with their free agent contract, so I'm not going to be swayed by how much they're paying him. And I forget who made the point, but it's a good point that the Patriots are one of those teams that is willing to admit that they made a mistake if they agree that they ended up paying Nelson Aguilar too much, and they're not going to just pump targets his way just to prove that they weren't wrong about his contract. But if Jacoby Myers is outplaying him and is earning those targets, that they will give those targets to Myers.
Okay.
Yeah, my thing with the New England passing game is I think the tight ends are going to get a lot more work than most other offenses, and you're going to see the running backs mix in a lot. Like James White's going to get a bunch of targets, to the point where I'm curious to know how many wide receivers the offense will even support. And I think Jacoby Myers is kind of the clear-cut number 1 there based upon everything these other guys said. But, Aguilar not really interested at this point. And, beyond that, I'm mostly interested in the tight ends because I think both Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry are talented players in their own rights. That both of them have injury concerns and they are going to eat into each other's workloads, which isn't great. But I think that they might be the primary touchdown scorers through the air. And, we'll see how that offense plays out. I think it's going to be interesting. But they have a lot of pieces. It's classic Belichick. Like, you don't necessarily want to be too overweight on any one player because there are going to be a lot of games where they mix it up.
So you just took Carson Wentz as the QB 29. One, I just want to say that was a great pick. I was kind of wondering when he would go now that we have the reports that seem to be a little bit sunnier in terms of when he will be back to start playing. Were you surprised that he lasted that long?
I wasn't, just because of the still uncertain availability for week 1. I would feel better about Carson Wentz for my team if I didn't already have a second quarterback that I know is not going to be starting in week 1. And to be honest, this is where I maybe misstepped. So Daniel Jones is the guy that was next up on my board, and I was thinking about taking last turn, and I realized he had the same bye week as Justin Fields. Maybe that's overthinking it. I thought about Derek Carr. I wondered if Derek Carr would get back to me, and he did not, because he had the different bye week. So, I'll take Carson Wentz when he is healthy. I think he has at least as much upside as those other guys. I certainly agree that with what you said, Sal. I think he's good value wise here, especially if you're in a situation where you don't need to use him week 1 and can kind of see where he's at before you put him into your lineup.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And by the way, can I say that even though I said I don't try to stack in these leagues, I now have 3 of them on my team. Stacks. So apparently it's just a subconscious thing.
So 29 quarterbacks so far taken. We're in round 12. Greg, earlier you had mentioned there was 28 quarterbacks around your list. You just took QB 30, Teddy Bridgewater. Jared is on the clock. So I'll ask you this question, Greg. Are there any other quarterbacks even worth drafting in this format right now?
Goff is going to play. Goff is worth drafting. Absolutely. Yeah. I like pretty much every other quarterback more than him. But again, it's about finding guys who are going to get the snaps. This late in the draft, all you really want is somebody to cover bye weeks and injuries, and Goff can definitely do that. So he's going to get drafted soon. I can feel it. Yeah, that Curtis Samuel pick, by the way, man, nice one.
You tried to coax me into drafting Jared Goff there. I wasn't going to do it.
I don't blame you.
Can we call attention to how Matthew Berry got mad at people for sniping his quarterbacks and then took 4 of them just to get back at people?
I haven't been paying attention to the chat. What did he say about the quarterback picks? That's strange to me.
I guess he got sniped on 3 different quarterbacks that he was hoping were going to get to him. None of them did. So I think he took 4. Maybe I'm wrong in saying that. But Sal, if we're into QB 30 plus territory, isn't that your domain? Shouldn't you be telling us who to target at this point?
Yeah, so you take Tim Boyle, then you take Kellen Mond, and we'll see. I'm still interested to see what's going to happen with Cam Newton now that he got released. So I've been trying to have this conversation with my friends, deciding where he could go. There's really no place he can go to for a starter position this late in the offseason, unless you kind of want to go to the mess in Houston, but they're not going to start Cam Newton and start him. So he's going to have to take a backup position somewhere. But what do you guys think would be some intriguing landing spots for him in terms of being a backup quarterback right now where he might be able to start?
What came immediately to my mind, I don't know if it's the right answer, but I guess Philadelphia. Similar type of quarterback as Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is unproven. They're not committed to him. I think that'd be a decent spot. He'd obviously be sitting on the bench for the first month at least.
Yeah, how many spots could he really have a shot at it? I think Houston is the best bet because they're relying on Tyrod Taylor. Apparently, I'm curious to see what they actually do with Deshaun Watson because, would they really have him on the active roster and just not play him? It's tough for me to imagine, but I guess we're about to find out.
I would have to imagine you have to make him inactive every week because you need that roster spot for someone you know is going to see the field every single week. I don't know his contract situation, if there's some sort of clause in there or whatnot, but I can't see a team wasting a roster spot on someone they know isn't going to see the field at all.
Mm-hmm.
But since we are kind of on this topic of backup quarterbacks, who's a quarterback you guys think he's a surefire starter week 1 that you could see benched at some point this season?
We could talk about the guy I just took, Teddy Bridgewater. He's my QB3, so it's not, there's not a ton of risk there. But just because he was named the starter and just because he gives them a better chance to win in the short term, at least in the eyes of the coaching staff there, doesn't mean they're actually going to win more games. They're still in a relatively difficult position or division against the Chiefs and the Chargers, and the Raiders aren't like complete pushovers either. If Denver, really does underperform in the early weeks, they could definitely go right back to Drew Lock. Like that could happen. I could see it happening, even though like they brought in Bridgewater for a reason. They've already named him the starter. Like the team has looked good in preseason when he's played, but I mean, he's Teddy Bridgewater. He's not going to necessarily lead them to the Super Bowl. I mean, maybe he can. Garoppolo did it for the Niners, but it's a little shaky there, I think, for our guy Teddy in Denver.
Yeah, I would almost expect to see Drew Lock at some point this season. I'll throw Derek Carr out there. His relationship with Gruden has always, seemed a bit icy. I think the Raiders aren't going to be very good this year. The offensive line, I think, is going to take a step back. And, you have a capable backup there in Marcus Mariota. So I think there's a chance that Carr is benched at some point.
All right, so Matt, you drafted Zach Ertz. There was so much talk this offseason of Zach Ertz being traded, yet here he is still on the Philadelphia Eagles roster. What was it about him that made you go with Ertz over, let's say, another tight end you might have been debating?
I'm just trying to telepathically turn him into a stack with Carson Wentz and get him traded to the Colts with this pick. That was my main motivation. No, I mean, I need tight end. It's starting to dry up a little bit. I'm tight end 21, I think, is late enough to take a shot. It sounds like he's still pretty involved in Philadelphia, so we'll see. I mean, we're on the verge of the season now, so I would think that if he were going to be traded by the time the season started, it would have happened by now, especially with Minnesota making that move for Chris Herndon. Clearly, it would have cost more than that, I think, to acquire Zach Ertz. So, I need somebody to start at tight end. Sounds like Zach Ertz is going to be on the field for Philly plenty, so fingers crossed here.
Jared, I want to go back to your last pick of Jamal Williams, because right before that, A.J. Dillon had went. We see Dillon and Williams kind of go in the same range in most fantasy drafts. If they had both been on the board when you had picked, was there going to be a debate between the two, or are you all about Williams there?
Yeah, it would have been Williams for me either way, especially in this league. And that's my RB3. So, he's a guy I'm going to have to be starting, at least out of the gate every week. And I just think he's going to have more standalone value than A.J. Dillon, without an injury ahead of him on the depth chart. Dillon has more upside. If Aaron Jones goes down, he'd outproduce Williams if DeAndre Swift went down. But Williams is a guy I've liked all offseason. I think he's going to have a role there. And I only like him more now that Swift's dealing with a groin injury. We'll see what his status is for week one and early on in the season. But I think Williams might play an even bigger role than they had planned out of the gate if, Swift isn't full go.
Greg, Matt, do you guys have a preference between Dillon and Williams?
I would take Williams. I mean, with the concerns around Swift, like Williams is probably their RB1 to start the season. And I'm generally playing for week one when I draft. You won't see me drafting Michael Thomas. You won't see me drafting other guys who aren't going to play in the first week for the most part. And yeah, I'll just lean right into that with Jamal Williams. Like he would definitely be the pick for me over A.J. Dillon.
Yeah, Jamal Williams for me too.
Okay. Well, sticking with.
By the way, let me correct myself real quick. Sorry to interrupt you, Sal. Let me correct myself. I was wrong. Matthew did not take 4 quarterbacks, so I didn't mean to slander him. It was an honest mistake.
Don't slander the Godfather.
We made an unofficial rule in this draft that you can only draft 4 quarterbacks if you work at 4 for 4. So I think we'll be good. Greg's the only one that could take 4 in this draft. But I want to stick with the Lions for a little bit because Tyrell Williams just went. Rashad Perriman was released. How are we supposed to handle the Lions wide receivers if we just completely exclude TJ Hawkinson from the equation in fantasy drafts?
I mean, all aboard Tyrell Williams, man. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I guess, is intriguing as well.
Sounds like they're going to be starting Khalif Raymond, so that tells you all you need to know about the Lions wide receiver core.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those teams too, kind of just like Houston, where you might just be better off ignoring the team altogether, right? Like you want to invest in good offenses, and the Lions are not going to be that.
I think they'll at least be like a clear tier above Houston. Like Detroit at least has a good offensive line. They have, Goff's the butt end of a lot of jokes. I think he's like a capable NFL quarterback, even if he's a lower end starter. That's why I like Jamal Williams and really DeAndre Swift when he's healthy. I think Hawkinson and like Swift could finish 1-2 on that team in targets, and then Jamal Williams could be 4th or 5th on the team in targets.
And that Melvin Gordon pick seemed really late to me.
Yep, he was on my radar.
And they actually just undid it. He's back on the board, I believe.
Oh, he's back on my radar.
Okay.
Let's switch to Devontae Parker.
I'm not used to this non-cutthroat drafting. This is, I mean, Devontae Parker, also a good pick at this stage.
Yep. All right, so we got to see Tony Pollard just went to, Scott Pianowski as the RB40. So 40 running backs through round 14. I want to say that's later than what I usually see Pollard go in most drafts. But again, this isn't a league. Well, this is a league where you start 3 running backs, but just kind of compared to like the other running backs, have we kind of seen the industry shift away from Pollard being one of the top backup running backs?
I just think in this league in particular, again, it's just, it's tough to stash guys. Like you only have 5 bench spots. And if you draft Pollard, you're basically saying I'm going to use one of those bench spots on him, all year or until Zeke goes down. So I just think his value is depressed a bit in this specific league.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, he's the kind of guy that I'm not taking it at any point in this draft because I don't want to have just a dead spot until he becomes something when Zeke Elliott goes down. I mean, I'm not drafting the straight handcuffs in most leagues anyway, but especially here, it's just somebody I'm skipping over.
Well, we've talked a lot about that 5 bench spots. Going into this draft, what was your guys' strategy on how you're going to handle the bench spot and like what position were you going to give a priority to? We can start with you, Jared, since you're going to be the last one drafting out of these 3 in the next little bit here.
I mean, for me, I like to use the bench spots on running backs and wide receivers. And to me, it comes down to how you spend your early picks. So, like, in my draft, I took 2 stud backs early. So I'll probably end up, I'll take a couple bench running backs, but I want to spend most of my bench spots kind of stockpiling wide receivers. I think could start for me. Because again, you have to start 6 in this league. I have 6 right now, and they're my 4, 5, 6 are on the weaker end. So I'm probably gonna stockpile wide receivers and hope I hit on one of these later guys.
My goal is generally to get as many startable wide receivers up front so that I can do the running back stash thing a little bit during the season. You have to do a lot of like in-season roster tinkering though, like using IR spots to kind of fix your bye week matchups every time. But it's I generally want to have at least one or 2 of those spots dedicated to like an upside running back pick. And I'm on the clock here, so I gotta sign off here. But that's generally one. And I also want to back up QB for obvious reasons. But yeah, that's my approach.
Okay. So Greg had pointed out earlier that Melvin Gordon, he was surprised he was still available. He did go 1 pick before you there, Matt. Was there any consideration of taking him there?
Yeah, I certainly would have considered Melvin Gordon if he got to me. I do have 3 running backs that I'm planning to start every week, so I'm a bit less worried about the extra there. For me, the backups here are going to kind of just fill in where I need it rather than me planning where I'm going to use them ahead of time. Obviously, there's going to be an extra quarterback at least from the start because I want to try to have 2 that I can start every week unless I, mess up where I pick them and I don't have that. But there's going to be a third of those. I knew that once I waited a while and got Evan Ingram as my top tight end, I was going to get an extra tight end. So I've got those 2 eating up spots. And, then I think it's a matter of following who's at wide receiver or running back. Using those 3 spots between those 2 positions, it really just depends on the specific players there. I'll add some upside to stash on the bench.
Okay. So Tyrod Taylor just went the QB 32. We have officially seen every starting quarterback in the NFL drafted through 14 rounds. Once Jared makes his next 2 picks, we'll just have 4 rounds left in this one. Greg, you are going to be picking very soon. I just wanted to ask you quickly, is it Bryan Edwards season, since that's who you just picked?
I mean, I hope so. That was, again, mostly just kind of a best wide receiver available, although I did have MVS very close. So Jared and I are seeing eye to eye on a lot of these picks.
Well, Edwards was my pick there. I had him queued up for a while, so I was not happy with you there. Sorry, not sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, have the 3 of you ever thought about teaming up to draft one team, just like how Ben and Shawn do?
There you go. I could never replace you as a teammate, Sal. Let's be real.
Yeah, you make a very good point there. I want to ask you about Zach Moss there, Jared. We have the Zach Moss versus Devin Singletary debate. What is it about Zach Moss that made you decide to take him?
I still think he has the higher ceiling because he gets at least some of the goal line work. I mean, we know Josh Allen gets a lot of it, but Buffalo just doesn't use Singletary near the goal line, so kind of tough to imagine him smashing and returning big value. Moss still probably needs a Singletary injury to be a guy you can really feel good about starting every week. But I don't know, at this point of the draft, a running back attached to that offense that again does get some goal line work. There's a chance Moss scores 8 or 9 touchdowns this season just because that Bills offense is so good.
So we got you're coming up here, Matt, on the clock right now. We just saw Singletary go. As Matt makes his pick here, I think we're all friends here. We all like pretty much the same players. We have only 3 rounds left. Who are some late round guys you generally like in drafts?
Give me a position at least, Sal. Prompt me a little bit.
Okay, well let's go with wide receiver since you have to start 6 of them. We've seen 73 of them go so far in this draft. Who are we looking at wide receiver 85 to wide receiver 90?
Demarcus Robinson is definitely an intriguing one. We talked about how condensed the Kansas City Chiefs offense could be. And I mean, who is the third who is the third receiving threat? Is it Demarcus Robinson? I mean, it seems like it should be, but they were talking up Byron Pringle a little bit. But I think that's the way I tend to lean in these later rounds is, again, target the good offenses in case an injury pops up or something like that. So go after Emmanuel Sanders on Buffalo. Go after MVS in Green Bay. Bryan Edwards in Las Vegas, not as good of an example, but that sort of kind of aim for the good offenses and hope that you get lucky or hope that you catch lightning in a bottle. That tends to be my approach. On that note, I like the Arizona guys. Christian Kirk, Rondale Moore. I'm not really on the AJ Green bandwagon, but I can see the reasons if you want to believe for taking him in this range of the draft. But yeah, for me, it's find the high octane offenses and try to poach from there.
Well, I think Bryan Edwards is a good example of the other path, though, in that you take the guy who could be the top target for an offense, whether it's good or bad. And if you can get somebody at wide receiver 70 who can lead his team in targets this year or finish behind Darren Waller but lead his team's wideouts in targets, that's a good guy to get at this stage in the draft.
It's a great point, yeah. Mostly because it backs up my pick.
Yeah, Robinson's a good one. I was wondering if Byron Pringle would take over that spot, but Robinson's run clear ahead of Pringle this preseason, so he looks like the guy there. Paris Campbell's a good one, especially with Hilton's injury. Quez Watkins is a guy I've been taking late. He looks like he's Philly's slot receiver to open the season, and Jalen Reagor might just be a bust. So Quez Watkins could be the number 2 receiver there by the middle of the season. Then I'll throw out Nico Collins too. I think he is going to be the number 2 wide out there right out of the gate. And I think there's still a chance that Cooks gets traded at some point this season. I mean, I think, Houston's open for business. They're not interested in winning this season. So, maybe Nico's the top guy there for whatever that's worth, being Houston's top wide receiver.
I do think if your league has IR spots, this is also the part of the draft where you could look at a player like Michael Thomas. He went way too early for my taste, but the later you get, the more appealing that sort of stash type of player comes up. Another player like that is Rashad Bateman on Baltimore. Maybe you're just not a Sammy Watkins believer and not a Marquise Brown believer, and you want Rashad Bateman's a good player. He's another 4-for-4 favorite, John Paulson favorite. Not going to be ready to start the year, but if you have that IR spot, maybe he's the type of guy you target in the late round and hope that, I hope with Bryan Edwards, that Bateman kind of elevates himself into being the top receiver for Baltimore. But again, typically not my style to take guys who aren't going to be available week 1.
Mm-hmm.
So, Greg, be honest with us. Did you say DeMarcus Robinson because that's who you wanted to say, or did you only say him because Matt took him just as you were about to answer that question?
To be honest, I was scrambling for an answer. And one, I didn't want to give away some of the names that I'm interested in. not just to these two guys, but to anybody else who might be watching. And two, because it was just an obvious like, oh yeah, that's a good reminder to like tie into the good offenses more than anything else. And Demarcus Robinson's a great example of that.
Well, let's stick with this theme of late round targets. We see, Matt, you have 3 tight ends. Greg, you have 2. Jared, you have 2. We've seen 25 of them go so far. Who are some guys in like, say, that tight end, basically tight end 26 to tight end 30 range, who you would kind of consider in this draft at this point? We'll start with you, Jared, since you're all the way at the end of this round picking.
Yeah, there's some names out there that I still think are draftable.
One of them just got picked.
Who just went?
Juwan Johnson.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Although, yeah, I mean, it sounds like Troutman's going to be back early in the season. I mean, who knows? Johnson might still be their lead pass-catching tight end. Dawson Knox, I'm still kind of interested in, especially after Buffalo released Jacob Hollister. Kind of the same argument as Zach Moss. Like, Knox is going to be on the field for a high-scoring offense. I think you could do worse there. Donald Parham is interesting, and I don't know how much Cook has left. Parham kind of flashed down the stretch last season. And then Dan Arnold, I think, is going to be the lead tight end in Carolina. I know it's, they have 3 wide receivers and Christian McCaffrey, so there's not a ton to go around. But, again, Arnold's going to be on the field. He's a guy that has flashed at times in Arizona and in New Orleans. So he's, I think he's a pretty talented pass catcher.
You see, Knox just went. We have a very mini tight end run going on right now. As Matt is on the board, I want to bring up this player's name just because it just came to mind with the Irv Smith Jr. Fantasy Twitter's favorite tight end, Chris Herndon, was traded to the Minnesota Vikings this year. Should we go for another ride on the Herndon train, or should we just quit him entirely?
Yeah,
quit.
Yeah, and Jared and I were both drafting Chris Herndon early this offseason, and it's clear that it's time to just be done. Just like anybody else, when I first saw that the trade was going through, I was like, oh, is this another opportunity for him? But then you see the compensation. They basically took a 2-round move up. It's not even a single draft pick that they are getting. So it's the Jets unloading the guy, the Vikings saying we need some depth. And for me right now, Tyler Conklin is the bet. And then we'll see about Irv Smith's knee after they, say what the timeline is following his surgery.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can only hang on to that rookie season for so long with Herndon, and it was impressive, but there's been nothing to like since then. So I'm kind of done with Chris Herndon.
So let's focus on your pick there, Matt. You took Rashad Bateman, wide receiver 79 overall. Who were you kind of debating there, and why did you end up going with Bateman?
I actually thought about Bateman the last time, and then I forgot that we had IR slots. So I appreciate Greg bringing that up to make him a viable player. So, I mean, it's just stashing upside for later. And I need some upside at wide receiver. It's getting pretty dry now.
Yeah, I was a little mad when you guys started talking about Nico Collins because he was definitely one of the guys I wanted to slip back, and I just picked him. So I think between Bateman and Collins, we all helped each other out there.
I mean, that's always our issue with doing this job, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm left with nothing though. You guys helped each other. And I got nothing.
Matt's just Jared's just gonna end the draft right now. Walk out.
Yeah, I'm out.
Straight to auto pick.
I'm glad that Jared and I aren't drafting right next to each other so that we know who the other one is considering at that turn.
All right. Well, we're looking at the same ranking, so we got a pretty good idea.
So we got just a couple more rounds left here. I'm just trying to look at the board, some interesting names to talk about. There was a spell there where everyone just fell in love with Boston Scott for a moment. He was the RB47. We're kind of wondering about Kenny Gainwell. Did you guys like the value of Boston Scott there at the end of, or not, the start of round 16? I'll let you go first, Matt, as Jared still has another pick and Greg will be picking very soon.
I mean, I think it's fine. I still think Boston Scott's a bit more of a handcuff than he is a standalone. I don't think that he's going to take enough receiving to be Nyheim Hines, but, I think if you draft him there, that's the hope. And it's late enough that you can take a shot that is what happens with Boston Scott. I think he's going to wind up being somebody that can't start for you in this particular format.
I think hurts him to some extent. Like that rushing quarterback does not always pair with a receiving running back. We've seen that across multiple different franchises and teams and setups, and that's generally something that doesn't excite me very much. The fact that Kenny Gainwell is also potentially there to take that work away from him is not great. So while I can't argue with basically any pick in the 16th, 17th, 18th round, like these are all dart throws at this point. Like there are other running backs I would have taken ahead of Boston Scott in that spot. Again, not to second guess the godfather of fantasy football.
It is interesting that they released Jordan Howard, and Kerryon Johnson's gone, so it's just Sanders, Gainwell, and Scott there now. I don't think Scott's capable of like taking on a big load on the ground. So I don't know. Maybe Gainwell ends up playing more than we're kind of expecting at this point.
So our first go ahead.
I think in a typical format, though, where you are not starting as many players and you do have more bench spots, I think Boston Scott is a fine stash in that range. So I think the value on him is fine.
Okay. So we had our very first, I guess technically is the starting quarterback. Niners still haven't announced who's going to be starting, but we can kind of say the first true backup quarterback taken in this draft with Jimmy Garoppolo going to QB 33. But one thing I wanted to ask all three of you guys, we can start with you, Jared. What do you guys think of Shawn and Ben's strategy of kind of targeting this Bucs backfield? They took Ronald Jones in round 13. They took Joe Bernard in round 16.
I'd rather take Jones and Fournette and just like hope one of them emerges. Like I don't think Jones impacts Gio much. I think they're playing two completely different roles. Like if Jones goes down, I don't think Bernard's role is going to change. I think both guys in a vacuum were fine where they were picked. Bernard is kind of that pass catcher who can be useful in a league like this, with all the, such thin rosters and you got to start three running backs. You get to bye weeks, like someone like Bernard, if you can get, 3, 4, 5 catches out of him, he's useful.
I'm not a big fan of stacking running backs from the same team in general. And those two, Bernard and did they take Jones or Fournette? I'm sorry. They took Jones.
They took Jones and then Bernard.
Yeah. I guess that at least you're getting both sides of the potential game flow situation, right? Like you're getting the early down guy in games that you think the Bucs might blow out the other team and Ronald Jones is going to get a bunch of targets. And then in the shootouts, maybe you bench Jones and you put Gio in. I think that sort of strategy makes sense. But again, tying two resources up for the same backfield is not something I'm generally a fan of. Although again, in the late rounds like this, you can't be too picky. Like that might've just been the best value for them.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I'm in line with those. I wouldn't generally want two players like that on the same team for a redraft roster where I'm setting it week to week, but it makes a lot more sense later in the draft when you're kind of hedging.
So we've kind of talked about deep late round targets, sleepers at wide receiver, tight end. A name I would read a lot in articles this offseason as a deep sleeper target was Donovan Peoples-Jones. He went here in round 17 as a wide receiver 82. Is he someone that you guys have been targeting late in drafts? If so, why? And if not, why not? We'll start with you, Jared.
Yeah, love DPJ as a prospect. Haven't been targeting him a whole lot, though. I think he's a handcuff. Cleveland uses a lot of two tight end sets. That third guy is not going to be out there a ton. And even when DPJ is out there, Landry, Beckham, kind of the clear two top guys. So I think he'll need an injury to be a factor. You have Beckham coming off the ACL. Anything can happen. And if he does get a shot, I think he can capitalize because then I do think he's a good player. I think it's going to be a good offense. So he's fine, getting him at that point. But he hasn't been like a priority target for me.
Yeah, kind of the same. Like I'm interested in the player, but the situation isn't great. And there are a lot of wide receivers in this range that I can talk myself into. So I haven't drafted him all that much. I think I have him on like 1 or 2 best ball teams. But, given Odell Beckham Jr.'s injury history, there's potential there for him to kind of get slotted into that deep threat role as a wide receiver 2 next to, or a wide receiver 1B next to Jarvis Landry. And there's appeal in that, even if they are like primarily a run heavy offense. But in terms of going after the Cleveland offense in the late rounds, like I'm more likely to go after Austin Hooper than DPJ.
Yeah. DPJ stands out to me if you get late into an underdog draft where all that wide receiver thirst early has taken everybody off the board, because his path might be shorter to relevance than some other guys based on Beckham's knee and just the fact that he should be the third one. So there should be weeks where DPJ does something useful.
All right, we are in the last round here.
Sal, can I steal the hosting duties and ask these guys a question? Because
Only because you asked so nicely.
Please. We've now seen the 3 primary running backs for the Jets go. How are you guys sorting out that backfield between Michael Carter, Ty Johnson, and Tevin Coleman? Because it seems a little nebulous. We know that these unknown sorts of backfields can lead to big-time value. I don't know if we're going to get that from the Jets necessarily, but how are you guys approaching the Jets running backs?
I'm mostly avoiding it. The Fleur comes from the Shanahan tree. They want to be a committee backfield. He said that multiple times this offseason that they want to use 2. It might even be 3 guys. I do still think Carter emerges as the lead guy and at least the primary pass catching guy. So he's the guy I want. And his price has dropped. Like if I'm getting him, RB 40, somewhere around there, he's fine. I think like Coleman could be a guy you can use, if you're desperate early on this season. It seems like he might open as the lead back, but definitely not a backfield I'm chasing too aggressively.
Yeah, I'm going to wait, and then take Tevin Coleman if I need a running back late in the draft because he's going to open the year as at least the leader of the committee. I think that's what the preseason told us anyway. We'll see if that's overreading the preseason, but I mean, they operated as though he's their lead back to begin things. So I'll go ahead and trust that in like round 17 of drafts and see if I get a starting running back for at least a few weeks.
I just want to put on the record that, Greg, I was going to ask the exact same question.
Is that right?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say that'd be too weird.
All right, we did it, guys. We made it through the Going Deep A-League for 2021. I'll ask a few general questions here. We'll start with you, Jared, since you had the 101 pick. What do you think was the value pick of the draft? I'll give you guys a few moments to look at the draft board, and then we'll hit up Greg and Matt just going in the draft order.
Man, a bunch of those running back. I mean, where did Melvin Gordon? Melvin Gordon, running back 41, especially in a league like this, like he's going to play a significant role out of the gate, and that's useful in this type of league. Even if Javonte Williams does end up taking over later. Elijah Moore, wide receiver 49. I was hoping he got to me there in the 10th round. So those are 2 that stick out to me. And I guess I'll give Greg some props with that Bryan Edwards pick, even though he sniped him from me. But wide receiver 70. That's like 20 wide receiver spots lower than I have him ranked.
Yeah, let's see. I really liked your Curtis Samuel pick, Jared. I thought that was much too late. Actually, Rondale Moore as well. I talked about how I like tying into that offense whenever I can. What other picks really stood out to me? Some of the QB values were really nice. Like I took Zach Wilson where I did, and then someone still got Jameis Winston, Derek Carr after them. Like, again, just usable pieces, like warm bodies at quarterback is kind of what I'm looking for in those later rounds. At running back, I thought the Darrell Henderson pick was a little late. RB 27. I know they brought in Sony Michel, but we know Michel's not a great pass catcher. Henderson should still be the passing down back there. And he is a good player for the most part when he's healthy. Like he showed that last year. That one stood out to me as well as one that was a little bit of a value. Not nearly as good as the Melvin Gordon pick that we talked about. Like that one was even more insane. But yeah, we talk about how wide receiver isn't necessarily deep. Like it's not as deep as people want to think it is, but there are just a lot of intriguing wide receivers that go in the double-digit rounds. And let's see, some of the ones that stand out to me, like Emmanuel Sanders. I really liked the Josh Palmer pick in the last round. Now that they've I've already forgot the name of their other guy. Somebody help me out there. Tyron Johnson's out of there. So Palmer's got a clear path to the wide receiver 3 role there. Scares me a little bit as the Mike Williams drafter. So yeah, there's value to be had everywhere. You just have to find it.
How about you, Matt?
I would like to highlight every one of my picks from round 9 on. I think Daniel Jones at QB 28 was a good one. We talked about him earlier, and it's tough for me to get excited about him at like QB 18, but at the very end, basically, of where QBs go in a Superflex draft, I think there's obviously only upside, and he has already showed us that he has a high weekly ceiling, especially if he cannot trip for those last 7 yards against the Eagles. I think other QB values down in that range look good too. Teddy Bridgewater, I think, has upside because of the guys around him. And he has to have been playing well this summer because every report on Drew Lock was positive, and then all of a sudden he lost the QB battle. So Teddy Bridgewater must be playing well. He's got plenty around him like he had in Carolina last year when he was a little bit unlucky on the touchdown front. Otherwise, I think Marquez Callaway stands out as a bit of a value now at wide receiver 50. I mean, it wouldn't have seemed like that a couple weeks ago, but he's climbing. And I think at wide receiver 50, you're still basically just buying the upside on him. And I think the immediate upside is there, especially now that we know who their quarterback's going to be, and it's the guy who has been a quarterback.
Can I quickly shout out a couple more picks that as I've been reviewing the draft board? Like, I just love what JJ did with the tight end position. Robert Tonyan is tight end 12. Hunter Henry is tight end 19. Dawson Knox is tight end 29. Like, he did not invest much in that position, but I would feel very comfortable if those are my 3 tight ends in this league. I think he did really good with that.
Right, so I know we all love patting ourselves on the back when we finish our fantasy drafts because we just love our rosters so much. But I want to ask you guys, in hindsight, looking at the board, how your rosters turned out, what do you think would be the biggest mistake you made?
I'll just piggyback off what I just said. Looking at where some of the tight ends fell to, Tyler Higbee in round 7, I would not make that pick again. I would have waited for Tonyan, Hunter Henry, Gerald Everett, Zach Ertz, and just use that pick on either a quarterback or a running back. And I mean, quarterback, I'm okay with my quarterbacks as they are. But yeah, if I could have gotten like Mike Davis in that spot, Damian Harris, Josh Jacobs, I think I'd feel a lot better about my running back group if I hadn't made that tight end pick there.
Yeah, I mean, same deal for me. Same deal with me with Noah Fant there in the 7th round. Just if I had known Goddard had made it back to me in the 8th, I would have taken. I would have gone wide receiver there, probably Laviska Shenault. It's
your fault that I picked Higbee where I did because you picked Fant. I just thought the run was coming. I'm like, okay, this is great. Jared's starting the run. I'm going to get another guy, and then we're going to clear out this tier before it gets back. And then sure enough, guys from that tier lasted 3 more rounds.
We had it right. There should have been a run there. Everyone else just got it wrong.
Yeah, we're the sharp ones.
I have to admit that back in round 5, I made a mistake and didn't have my board scrolled all the way to the top and made a quick draft decision and took Matthew Stafford without realizing that Jalen Hurts was still there. And, that's not one that I'm like, oh, God, I can't believe I did that. But I think between them, Jalen Hurts is the guy with the fantasy ceiling, and I would have taken him in that spot. Otherwise, I think maybe taking Daniel Jones in that spot where I took Darnell Mooney or Derek Carr. I think either one of those guys might be a little bit safer than Carson Wentz, given that I already have the upside bet in Justin Fields, who's not going to be on the field for week 1. If I could go back and switch those, I'd probably make that switch, and then it would be just another receiver in that Carson Wentz spot that I think is probably similar in outlook to Darnell Mooney.
Can I ask you how far behind you have Tannehill relative to Stafford too? Because that was another quarterback pick. I probably would have taken Tannehill over Stafford if I was in your position in addition to Hurts.
They're right together. That's the kind of situation where it might actually sway me to take the quarterback if I already have the receiver, just because they are close. I think that, they're right there, and I get having Tannehill ahead because he has the rushing upside. So I think if I were choosing between them in 10 drafts, it would probably be 5-5 or 6-4, maybe in Stafford's favor.
Okay.
We are getting close to 2 hours here, so I'm going to ask one more question before I leave it to final parting thoughts. Outside of your roster, outside of the other 2 guys you drafted against, who do you think had the best overall team here?
I don't feel prepared to answer that. I'll probably just go with Shawn and Ben because they seem to do well in this league every year.
I'm looking at Mike Clay's draft right now, and I do like it. I think he got good value on both Mahomes and Barkley at the top of the draft. CeeDee Lamb is his wide receiver 1. Kyle Pitts is his tight end 1. I'm not a big David Montgomery fan, but just structurally that start with the values on Mahomes and Barkley, I like that. And I think while he made some picks that I don't necessarily agree with, again, the way he put his roster together and kind of structured the order of his positions as he picked them made a lot of sense to me. So I like the way his draft came out. And then, circling back to JJ, what he did at tight end allowed him to get a bunch of really good picks in the early rounds at other positions. So those are the 2 that stand out to me.
Yeah, I like those builds. I'll throw in that I also like the way that Pete and Henry's team came together. A couple of high upside running backs early, solid wide receivers right in that range. They waited on quarterback, but still got Kirk Cousins at 13, Trevor Lawrence behind that. So there's the steadiness of Kirk Cousins, upside of Trevor Lawrence. So, I mean, looking through this board, I can't find teams where I'm like, that team is the one I'm definitely going to beat. That team is the one that's going to win this league. So, I think I can look at all these and find things that are good or that I might have done differently.
All right, so final parting thoughts, gentlemen. We'll start with you, Jared, then Matt, then Greg. And if you guys have anything you want to plug, or where they can find you on Twitter, all that good stuff, have at it.
No, I just appreciate you guys having me on. This is one of my favorite drafts of the year, honestly, just because of the format, because of the competition. I'll let Matt handle the plugs for Draft Sharks.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of my job for us. So come on over to Draft Sharks. Sign up for DS Insider, use a draft war room. It'll help you through a draft like this where you never know who to pick every round. You look to the board and it's like, hey, this is the position you should go for now. And I say thank you and just make that pick. And thank you guys for having me on as well.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, guys. We've been drafting this league a number of years together, and I agree with you, Jared. Like, this is one of the best leagues because of the competition, because of how deep it goes. Like, it really makes you flex your muscles at every position, and I really appreciate that. If any of the viewers out there are interested in getting into 2 quarterback leagues and Superflex leagues, Sal and I put out a draft guide specific to the 2 quarterback format. You can go to superflex.guide to pick that up. Use promo code 4for4. The number 4, FOR, the number 4. You can see it scrolling across the bottom of the screen now. That'll give you 15% off the cover price. It's $11.11 in honor of the 2 QB spirit animal, Alex Smith. So you're actually going to pay less than that if you use the promo code. But yeah, come check out the guide. Hit us up on Twitter if you got any questions about what's in there. We'll be happy to share and tell you what's going on. Otherwise, catch me on Twitter at Greg Sauce. Catch me at 4for4. Sal and I are going to be doing a weekly show in season, and I'll have some betting content there on the betting side during the year. So looking forward to a good season. Jared, Matt, thanks again for coming on. Yeah, thanks for calling on, everybody. You guys can find Jared on Twitter at Smola, SMOLADS. You can find Matt on Twitter at SCHAUFDS. You can find me on Twitter at SalPal2. Thanks for watching, everybody. And it's 10 p.m. Go to bed. Good night, everyone.